HOA cut fences and laid pipe across my land. It started with a simple mistake, or at least that's what I thought. One day I came home to find a massive trench running across my lawn, and there it was, a pipe, running straight through my land. I didn't know what to think, but then I saw her, Carol, the HOA president, smiling from her window, watching me. I knew something was wrong, and I wasn't going to let it slide. But what happened next will shock you. How far would you go to stop them from taking your land? Stay tuned. Welcome to HOA Unit. I'm your host, Mark. I live right here in the heart of suburbia. Just like you, I've had my run-ins with the HOA. But trust me, the story you're about to hear, it's unlike any other. Let's dive into this crazy tale of power, pettiness, and justice. You won't believe how it ends. The day I realized something wasn't right started like any other. I had just finished mowing the lawn. The sun was low, casting long shadows across my neatly trimmed grass. The smell of fresh-cut grass hung in the air. I stood there for a moment, wiping the sweat off my brow, admiring my work. But then, something caught my eye. It was subtle at first, just a shift in the landscape. But as I looked closer, my heart sank. The fence. It was gone. Not completely, but enough for me to notice. A large section of it, the part that ran across the back of my property, was just missing. I squinted, wondering if maybe the storm had knocked it down. But no, this wasn't the work of a storm. I walked over to the spot, my boots crunching on the dry earth. The ground was freshly disturbed, and I could tell it wasn't an accident. Someone had done this. I knelt down to get a better look, and that's when I saw it. The trench. A long, deep trench had been dug right along the line where the fence used to. Miss, I felt my stomach tighten. It was too clean, too deliberate. And then I saw it. A pipe. A thick, black pipe running through the trench. It wasn't just some random pipe. It was connected to something. But to what? I stood there for a moment, frozen. It was like someone had decided to take over my land without asking, without telling me. But who? The HOA. I thought about it for a second, then dismissed it. The HOA had always been a pain, but this was something else. They wouldn't just show up and start digging without warning. Would they? I turned around, scanning my property. Everything seemed normal, except that pipe, and that trench, and the unsettling feeling creeping up my spine. I walked back to the house, my mind racing. Who had done this? Why hadn't I been notified? Was it some kind of mistake? I felt the urge to call someone, but I didn't know who. So I did what anyone would do in that situation. I checked the HOA website. I clicked through page after page of boring legal jargon until I found something about construction and property lines. Nothing about digging trenches, nothing about pipes. My frustration grew with every click. I picked up the phone and dialed the HOA office. A woman answered, and I could already tell she was trying to sound too pleasant. "Hello, this is Karen from the HOA office. How can I help you today?" I tried to keep my voice steady, but I couldn't hide the annoyance. "Karen, I just got home and noticed that someone's dug a trench right across my property, and there's a pipe running through it. Can you explain what's going on?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. I'm not sure what you're referring to. Would you like me to send someone out to look at it?" I was taken aback. She didn't seem the least bit concerned. "Wait, you don't know about this? A pipe? A trench? It's on my land. It's right next to the fence." "That was just taken down." "Oh, well," she said, her voice suddenly more distant. "We've been working on some neighborhood improvements. You should have received a notice." "A notice?" I hadn't received any notice. I would have remembered that. I clenched my fist, trying to keep my cool. I didn't get any notice. Are you telling me the HOA is just going to dig up my property without asking me first? Well, you see, Karen began, her tone becoming less friendly. We're making some updates to the water systems, and that does involve some digging on private property. But don't worry, it's all approved. Approved? I repeated, my voice rising. Who approved it? And why wasn't I informed? There was another long pause before she spoke again. Your property is part of the project area. You were notified, but sometimes the notices get lost in the mail. I could feel my blood pressure rising. You're telling me the HOA is digging up my land without my permission. And now you're telling me it's my fault for not receiving a notice? Now, sir, she said, her voice sharp, we don't need to escalate this. The work will be done soon, and it's all in compliance with the neighborhood guidelines. I could hear the practiced tone in her voice now. She had said these words 100 times before. But this time, something was different. I wasn't going to let them bulldoze over me. I had been a good neighbor. I had followed all the rules. I paid my dues, kept my lawn neat, followed all the absurd guidelines they set. But this was a line I wasn't going to let them cross. I ended the call without saying another word. I stood there, staring at the trench, the pipe. Something had to be done. This wasn't just about a pipe or a trench. This was about control. And I wasn't about to let the HOA have that control over me. But what could I do? Was there a way to stop them? I couldn't just sit around and wait for them to finish. I needed to act. But how? Would I just let them get away with this, or would I take matters into my own hands? I couldn't stop thinking about that trench and the pipe as I lay awake that night. The way it cut right through my land, like it belonged there, made my blood boil. I kept replaying the conversation with Karen in my head, the way she brushed it all off like it was no big deal. It's approved, she had said. Approved by who? I never signed anything. I hadn't even seen a notice. I tried to convince myself that maybe I was overreacting. But something in the pit of my stomach told me this wasn't just a simple mistake. I needed answers. Real answers. So the next day, I did what any sane person would do. I went down to the HOA office. I had a mission, to find out exactly what was going on, and more importantly, to find out why no one had told me about it. The HOA office was located in a little brick building, tucked away behind a row of manicured hedges. It looked like every other boring suburban office, the kind of place where people came to pay dues and complain about the mailbox standards. But today, I wasn't there to pay dues. I was there to get answers. I stepped inside, and the familiar smell of stale coffee hit me. The receptionist, an older woman with thick glasses, looked up from her computer. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice polite but unbothered. "Yes, I'm here about the project going on in my neighborhood. The trench. The pipe." I started, trying to stay calm. Her eyes narrowed slightly, like she recognized the trouble in my voice. "Ah, yes," she said, tapping away on her keyboard. "That project. It's all part of the water system upgrade." I raised an eyebrow. "Water system upgrade? No one told me about any upgrade." She gave me a tight smile. "Well, the notices went out. People don't always read them, but I were sent." "Funny," I said. "I didn't get one." Her smile faltered just a bit, but she quickly recovered. "Well, sir, I'm sure there's been some mistake. You can always check the website for the details." I wasn't buying it. Something about the way she spoke made it feel like I wasn't the first person to walk in here with complaints. "I want to speak to someone in charge," I said firmly. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "One moment, please." I waited for what felt like an eternity. As I sat there, I could feel the walls closing in. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. How could they do this to me? How could they just invade my property without any real warning or consent? After a while, the door opened and a man walked in. He was tall, dressed in a crisp suit, his tie just a little too tight. He looked like the type of person who had made a career out of telling people what they didn't want to hear. "Mr. Lawrence," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Brad Jensen, the HOA manager. How can I help you?" I shook his hand, trying to keep my composure. "I'm not sure what's going on, Brad, but there's a pipe running through my property. No one told me about it, and I didn't approve it." Brad nodded, like he had heard this all before. "I understand your frustration, but this is a necessary update for the neighborhood's infrastructure. It's for the greater good." "The greater good?" I repeated, my voice rising. "What does that even mean? I didn't get a vote in this. No one consulted me about it." Brad stayed calm. Too calm. "It's in the bylaws, Mr. Lawrence. All homeowners in this area are subject to the HOA's decisions when it comes to neighborhood improvements. The pipes and the trenches are part of a larger initiative to upgrade the water system." I clenched my fists. "I don't care about the water system. I care about my property." Brad's expression didn't change. "I understand. But as I said, this work is necessary, and it's been approved by the board." I could feel my face turning red. "So what? I just have to accept this? There's no way out of it?" "Well," Brad said slowly, "you can always try to appeal. But I can assure you it's unlikely to go anywhere. This is a major project for the neighborhood. We're not going to stop it for one property." I felt a knot tighten in my chest. "You're telling me I have no rights? That this whole thing is just happening and I can't do anything about it?" Brad didn't flinch. "Exactly." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to leave, walk away, and just let it go. But another part of me, a bigger part, felt the anger building inside me. I wasn't going to let this go. I wasn't going to let the HOA bulldoze me. I turned on my heel and stormed out of the office. The nerve of that man. Of all of them. They thought they could just run roughshod over me because I was one homeowner in a sea of rules and regulations. But they were wrong. I wasn't going to sit back and take it. The more I thought about it, the more I realized something had to be done. I had to do something. But what? What could I do to stop this madness before they got even further? The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. My mind was racing. That trench, that pipe, the whole situation had pushed me to a breaking point. It was like everything I had worked for, everything I had built on my property, was being slowly chipped away. I thought about the conversation with Brad at the HOA office, the way he had looked me in the eye and told me I had no say in the matter. It pissed me off. No one had the right to come onto my land and do whatever they wanted. I knew what I had to do. The first thing was to gather all the information I could. I couldn't just march into battle blindly. I needed to know my rights. I needed to find something that would give me leverage. So, I spent the entire day combing through the HOA's bylaws, page after page of boring legal jargon. My eyes burned from the screen, and I could feel my patience running thin. But I wasn't going to give up. And then I found it. There it was, buried deep in the fine print. Something about property rights and the HOA's ability to make changes to the neighborhood infrastructure. It was vague, almost purposely so. But the more I read it, the more it became clear that I had a case. The HOA didn't have the power to just waltz in and destroy my land without my permission. I wasn't about to let them get away with this. Armed with my newfound knowledge, I decided to confront the HOA again. But this time, it wasn't going to be about polite conversation or explanations. This time, I was going to take action. I had a plan. I grabbed my phone and dialed the HOA office once more. Karen picked up this time. Her voice was still that same overly sweet tone that had rubbed me the wrong way before. "Hello, this is Karen from the HOA office. How can I assist you today?" I took a deep breath. "Karen, it's Mr. Lawrence. I've reviewed the HOA's bylaws, and it looks like your office has overstepped its boundaries. I want you to stop the work on my property immediately." There was a long pause. I could hear the clicking of her keyboard in the background. "Mr. Lawrence, I'm not sure what you mean. We've already explained." "I know what you've explained, Karen," I cut in. "But according to the bylaws, the HOA doesn't have the authority to do this without my consent. I want you to stop the work, and I want a written explanation." Silence. Finally, she spoke. "I'll pass your request along to management, but you see, would know that this project is already well underway, and it's unlikely that anything will change." Her tone was cold, dismissive, but I didn't care. I knew this wasn't over. The HOA had underestimated me. They thought I'd just roll over, accept their decisions, and move on. But I wasn't like the other homeowners in the neighborhood. I had a fire inside me now. I wasn't going to let them trample all over me. I hung up the phone and immediately started drafting a letter. I wasn't going to just make a phone call and hope for the best. I was going to put everything in writing, on paper, and send it to every board member in the HOA. If they were going to mess with me, they were going to know that I wasn't going to back down. The letter was direct, to the point. I laid out the facts, quoted the bylaws, and demanded that the work stop immediately. I included a timeline. If the work wasn't stopped within a week, I'd be forced to take further action, legal action. I wasn't an attorney, but I knew enough to make my case clear. I sealed the letter, and as I dropped it into the mailbox, I couldn't help but feel a little thrill. This was the first step. But the feeling didn't last long. The moment I got back inside, I started to feel the weight of what I had just done. What if they ignored the letter? What if they didn't take me seriously? And what if they decided to fight back harder than I could handle? I knew the HOA wouldn't take kindly to this. They were used to getting their way. But I couldn't let fear stop me. If I let them walk all over me now, it would set a precedent. The HOA would know that they could just steamroll anyone who disagreed with them. I wasn't about to be that person. I was going to fight back no matter what. The waiting was the hardest part. Every day felt like an eternity. I kept checking my mailbox, hoping for a response, but nothing came. Not a single letter, not a single phone call. I was starting to feel like I was in a standoff with an invisible enemy. Then, a week later, I got a letter in the mail. It was from the HOA. I tore it open, heart racing. The letter was polite, too polite. It didn't address any of my concerns directly. It was full of vague language, more of the same BS I had heard before. But there was one thing in the letter that caught my eye. They had scheduled a hearing with the board of directors to discuss the project and my complaints. It wasn't exactly what I had hoped for, but it was a start. And it meant that they were taking me seriously. The next step was clear. I was going to that hearing, and I wasn't going to back down. But would the HOA back off? Or was this just the beginning of something bigger? I wasn't prepared for what happened next. The day of the hearing came, but it wasn't anything like I had expected. I walked into the HOA office, holding my head high, confident that I had done my homework. I had read through the bylaws. I had crafted the perfect argument. But as I stood there, waiting for the meeting to start, I felt a wave of doubt. Would they take me seriously? Or was this just another game where the HOA always won. The room was cold, too cold for comfort. The walls were lined with bland artwork, and the fluorescent lights flickered above. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had walked into a battle I wasn't quite ready for. Brad was already there when I walked in, sitting at the head of the table. His suit was even more pressed than usual, and there was a smug look on his face that I couldn't shake. "Mr. Lawrence," he said, his voice dripping with politeness, "glad you could join us." I nodded, trying to keep my cool. "Let's get this over with." "Ketka," I said. Brad motioned for me to sit at the other side of the table. As I took my seat, I noticed the rest of the board members sitting behind him. There was Carol, the HOA president, her eyes locked onto me like I was the last thing she wanted to see today. There was also Linda, a woman I had seen around the neighborhood, always with a clipboard in hand, making sure everyone's lawn was up to code. And then there was Roger, the quiet one. He had never said much, but I could tell from the way he sat there that he was one of the more passive-aggressive members of the board. They all stared at me like I was a bug under a microscope. The tension was thick. Brad cleared his throat. "Mr. Lawrence, we've read your letter and we understand your concerns. But as we explained to you on the phone, this project is necessary for the improvement of the community." I leaned forward. "I'm not against improvement, Brad. I'm against the fact that I wasn't consulted. I'm against the fact that my property was dug up without my consent." Carol interjected, her voice as sharp as ever. "You're making a big deal out of nothing, Mr. Lawrence. This is just a small project. It's for the betterment of the neighborhood." I couldn't believe how dismissive they were being. I looked at the other members, hoping for some sign of support, but they all seemed too busy with their notes to care. Linda flipped through her papers, pretending to be absorbed in her work, while Roger tapped his pen on the table, clearly bored. I realized I was alone in this fight. Brad continued, "Now, we understand that you're upset, but the reality is, this project will continue whether you like it or not." I could feel my anger rising. I had done everything right. I had followed every rule, paid every fine, mowed my lawn on time, and yet here they were treating me like I was the problem. "I don't care about the project," I snapped. "I care about my rights. You don't get to just take over my property without asking." Carol's smile was tight, almost mocking. "Mr. Lawrence, we've already explained this to you. It's for the greater good." "Greater good," I repeated, my voice shaking with frustration. "What does that even mean? This is my property. It's not yours to just take." There was an awkward silence. I could feel the tension growing, thickening like a storm about to break. Finally, Brad leaned back in his chair. "Let's be honest here. You're not going to win this. The project has already been approved. The work will continue." I clenched my fists. I wasn't going to back down. "I'm not leaving here without a resolution," I said, my voice low and steady. Brad looked at me with an almost pitying glance. "You have no choice but to accept it. The board has already made its decision." But I wasn't ready to accept it. I knew something had to be done, and I wasn't about to let them steamroll me. I stood up from the table and all eyes followed me. "You're making a mistake," I said, my voice carrying across the room. "This isn't just about a pipe or a trench. This is about control. And if you think I'm just going to roll over and let you take my land, you're wrong." I turned and walked out of the room, my mind racing. They weren't going to back down. But neither was I. As I stepped into the cool evening air, I could feel the weight of what had just happened. The board didn't care about me. They didn't care about my property. They only cared about their power. And now I had to find a way to fight back. But what could I do? How could I turn the tables on them? I couldn't just wait for them to finish their project and let them win. I needed to take action. But what action? Would they keep pushing me, or would they finally back off? And how far was I willing to go to make them listen? I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room, staring at the letter from the HOA in my hands, running through the events of the day over and over. They had made it clear. They weren't backing down. The hearing was a disaster. I had thought I could at least get them to understand my side, but they didn't even try to listen. It was like they had already made up their minds, and I was just some nuisance they had to deal with. I wasn't going to let this go. There had to be something more I could do. I couldn't just sit back and wait for them to finish the project. I needed to take control, and I needed to do it now. But how? That night, I found myself scrolling through page after page of online forums, talking to people who had been through the same thing, homeowners who had fought back against the HOA and won. It wasn't the answers I was looking for, but it gave me an idea. A small idea, but enough to give me hope. One thread mentioned something called property easement laws. I had never heard of them before, but apparently they were the key to stopping any unwanted construction on your land. The thing was, you had to prove that the HOA had no right to access your property without permission. I needed more information. I spent the rest of the night reading everything I could about property rights and easement laws. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick, but by the time the sun started to rise, I had a plan. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I had an appointment scheduled with a lawyer the next morning. The moment I stepped into that office, I felt a strange mix of excitement and fear. I had no idea what I was doing, but for the first time in days, I felt like I was doing something about the problem. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Emily, listened to my story with a calm expression. She didn't interrupt, didn't make any assumptions. She just listened. When I finished, she nodded slowly. "I think you've got a strong case," she said. I felt a wave of relief, but I didn't let myself get too hopeful. "Really?" She nodded again. "It's clear the HOA didn't have proper consent to access your property. And if they've been working without your approval, you could have grounds for a lawsuit." My heart raced. "You're saying I could stop them?" She looked at me, her expression serious. "You have every right to fight back. You've got the law on your side. But it's not going to be easy. The HOA is powerful, and they're not going to give up easily." I had come this far, and I wasn't going to back down now. "I'm ready to fight," I said, my voice steady. "What's the next step?" Emily smiled slightly. "The next step is gathering all the documentation. We'll need to send a formal letter to the HOA demanding they stop all work on your property. If they don't respond, we'll file a lawsuit." It felt surreal. Just a few days ago I had been helpless, unsure of what to do. Now I had a plan. I wasn't just fighting the HOA anymore. I was fighting for my rights. That afternoon, I drafted a letter with Emily's help. It was professional, direct, and firm. It laid out the facts. The HOA had no legal right to access my property, and they needed to stop the work immediately. I signed it, feeling a sense of power I hadn't felt in days. I mailed it off the next morning, and then I waited. The waiting was always the worst part. Every time the mailman showed up, I rushed to the mailbox only to be disappointed. No letter, no response. But then, a week later, I got the letter I had been waiting for. It was from the HOA. I opened it slowly, my hands shaking. The letter was short, straight to the point. It was a rejection. They were refusing to stop the work on my property. I wasn't surprised, but I wasn't defeated either. I picked up my phone and called Emily right away. "We're filing the lawsuit," she said without hesitation. And so we did. The legal battle was about to begin, and I had no idea what I was getting myself into. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let the HOA win. They thought they could bulldoze me, take over my land, and get away with it. They were wrong. I was done playing by their rules. The war had just begun. But would it be enough to stop them? Would the legal system be on my side, or was I just fighting a losing battle? It felt like the world had shifted beneath me. I stood there in my kitchen, staring at the letter from the HOA, my heart pounding in my chest. The rejection was a cold slap, but it didn't stop me. It only made me more determined. They thought this would be over with one letter. They thought I'd back down. But they were wrong. The lawsuit had been filed, and now it was a matter of waiting for the HOA to respond, or better yet, for the court to decide. I didn't know what would happen next. The legal battle was about to get ugly, and I could feel the tension building up every day. But I was ready. I was prepared for whatever they threw my way. The first few days after filing felt like a strange mix of calm and chaos. I went back to my normal life, checking the mail every day, hoping for some kind of response from the HOA. But nothing came. Not a letter, not a phone call, just silence. Then, one evening, I came home to find a letter in my mailbox. I could feel the weight of it before I even opened it. It was from the HOA's lawyer. I ripped it open, my hands shaking. The letter was short, but it didn't leave much to the imagination. It said that the HOA was rejecting my claims and refusing to stop the work on my property. They even threatened to sue me for interfering with the project. I wasn't surprised, but it didn't stop the knot in my stomach from tightening. This wasn't just a fight over a pipe or a trench anymore. This was personal. It was a battle for my home. I didn't know what I expected, but it wasn't this. I called Emily, my lawyer, immediately. "We knew this was coming," she said when I explained the situation. "They're not going to back down without a fight. But neither are you. We need to prepare for court." And prepare we did. The next few weeks were a blur. Emily and I spent hours going over the details, gathering evidence, preparing arguments. The whole time, I felt like I was caught in a whirlwind. I couldn't think of anything else. The more I got into it, the more I realized just how far the HOA had gone. They had used every trick in the book to avoid accountability, sending vague notices, hiding behind technicalities, and flat out ignoring their responsibilities. But it didn't matter. I wasn't giving up. The court date finally arrived, and I was standing there in front of the judge with Emily at my side. The room was cold and sterile, filled with people who had no idea what this fight was really about. To them, it was just another case, another fight over property rights. But to me, it was everything. I looked across the room at the HOA's lawyer. He was sitting there, all smug and confident, like he knew he had already won. But he didn't know me. He didn't know what I was willing to do to win this. The judge called the proceedings to order, and the room went quiet. Brad and Carol were there, sitting at the back, their faces tense but unreadable. I could feel their eyes on me, but I didn't flinch. This was my Ritte. The lawyer for the HOA stood up first, a tall man with slicked back hair. He started to speak, but I wasn't listening to him. I was too busy thinking about everything that had led up to this moment. I was thinking about how they had dug up my property without asking, how they had tried to bulldoze me, how they thought I'd roll over and let them do whatever they wanted. But they didn't know me, and they didn't know the fight I had inside me. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up and walked to the podium. I wasn't nervous. I had rehearsed my speech over and over in my head. I started with the facts, explaining how the HOA had taken action without my consent. I went over the bylaws, quoting specific sections about property rights and easements. I watched as the judge listened intently, nodding at the points I made. The HOA lawyer interrupted me a couple of times, trying to twist my words, but I wasn't having it. I stood my ground. Every time he tried to dismiss my argument, I pushed back harder, and when I finished, I didn't just sit down. I looked directly at the judge and said, "I'm not here to just stop a pipe from being laid on my property. I'm here to stop a system that thinks it can control me, take my land, and do whatever it pleases without consequences. I'm not asking for permission anymore. I'm demanding justice." The courtroom was silent. I could feel the weight of my words hanging in the air. The judge didn't speak right away. He just sat there, considering everything I had said. The tension in the room was unbearable. And then, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "We will take a recess, and then I will give my ruling." I sat back down, my heart still racing. I wasn't sure what was going to happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. This fight wasn't over. I had done everything I could to stop the HOA. I had fought with everything in me. But would it be enough? Would the judge rule in my favor? Or would I have to fight even harder to win? Do you think I stood a chance? Or do you think the HOA will find a way to win this? The courtroom was silent as the judge called for recess. I sat there, my hands sweating, heart pounding in my chest. I could feel every second drag by like an eternity. My mind raced through everything I'd said, everything I had done to get to this point. Was it enough? Was I strong enough to stand my ground? The judge had left the room with the papers in his hands, and I was left sitting there, feeling like my entire future was hanging on the edge of a cliff. I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over yet. The HOA had been relentless, and even though I had put up the best fight I could, I knew they were playing the long game. They weren't going to go down without pulling out every trick in their playbook. Brad's smug face flashed in my mind. I could still picture him in that meeting, leaning back in his chair, telling me I didn't stand a chance. Well, here I was, standing in front of a judge, and I wasn't backing down. But was it enough? The door to the courtroom opened, and the judge stepped back in. The room instantly fell quiet again. He took his seat, looked at the papers in front of him, and then met my eyes. "I've reviewed all the evidence," he said, his voice steady. "And while the HOA's intentions may have been well-meaning, it's clear that they overstepped their boundaries." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" I asked, barely able to keep the excitement out of my voice. The judge glanced over at Brad, who was shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "The work done on Mr. Lawrence's property was not in compliance with the laws surrounding property rights and easements. The HOA did not have the proper consent or approval to access Mr. Lawrence's land." A wave of relief flooded over me. It was happening. I was winning. But the judge wasn't done yet. "I am ruling in favor of Mr. Lawrence. The work on his property must cease immediately, and the HOA is required to restore the property to its original condition at their own expense." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Carol's face was red with fury, but I didn't care. Brad, too, looked like he had just been punched in the gut. I wanted to stand up, cheer, shout, but I stayed seated, trying to keep my composure. The judge looked at me one last time. "Mr. Lawrence, I would also recommend that you and the HOA board resolve this matter through direct communication to prevent further escalation." That was it. I had won. The HOA had lost. But as the gavel came down, I realized something. This wasn't just about a pipe or a trench. It was about standing up for myself. It was about making sure that I wasn't just another homeowner who would be steamrolled by the system. I wasn't going to let anyone take my property without a fight. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, triumph, and even a little bit of disbelief. I had done it. I had won. The HOA was going to have to fix everything, and I wasn't going to pay a single penny for their mess. I couldn't wait to get home and watch as they tore out that pipe and filled in that trench. But as I drove home, I started to think about what I had learned from this experience. I had fought a system that seemed unmovable, a group of people who thought they had all the power. But in the end, it was about more than just property lines and legal battles. It was about standing up for what's right. The HOA wasn't going to control me. They weren't going to get away with what they had done. And that was the most satisfying feeling of all. When I finally got home, I stood in front of my house, looking at the spot where that pipe had once been. The ground was still torn up, but I knew it wouldn't be for long. I smiled to myself. I had won. But as I thought about everything that had happened, one question lingered in my mind. How many other homeowners out there were dealing with the same kind of power struggle? How many people were letting the HOA walk all over them, just like I almost did? And how many were too afraid to fight back? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Would you have fought back? Or would you have let the HOA win?